This is Professor Okonkwo. I'm a medical doctor specializing in internal medicine, and I'm a subspecialist in nephrology, which is kidney and hypertension. And I'm also a subspecialist in solid organ transplantation medicine, consulting in kidney and pancreas transplant. I am presenting this topic because I had an encounter with a couple of patients recently that made me realize how unaware that people are concerning the consequences of untreated anemia. And there is no way to know that you are anemic as a non-medical personnel without checking your blood tests. So it's when you do the blood count that you find out that your blood count is low. So anemia is a state of having low blood count, meaning your red blood cell is less than the normal level. There are many things that can make it happen. So I'm going to group them in 3 groups. One is first for us to understand, since the bone marrow is responsible for making red cells. So if you have inadequate production of red cells, either because the bone marrow is sick or because it does not have enough nutrients to make the red blood cell, then anemia will result as a result of that deficiency. Another way is blood loss, which means if you cut yourself and you're bleeding, like you have an accident or you've somebody has an injury and you start bleeding uncontrollably, if it's not stopped, in some cases, if you've lost a lot of blood, then you need blood transfusion in order to replace what you have lost for you to survive. There are other ways to have blood loss. As an example, women during their monthly period lose blood, and it's called menstruation. That loss of blood is expected to be a certain amount. If it's much more than that, it becomes a problem. And even if the person bleeds a normal amount, you still have to eat adequately to provide your body all the necessary ingredients in order to produce more red cells. So your body is constantly making red cells and constantly destroying them. A normal red cell lives about 120 days in your body. So while they are aging to die off, the bone marrow is producing another one to replace them. So there's a balance. While you are losing some blood, then the body is making more blood. Another way someone can lose blood is by destroying the red cells after they are made. The destruction can come as a result of many factors. Some are genetic factors. Some come from illnesses. Some come from medications that we take. Many others. For instance, somebody with sickle cell anemia, particularly only found in Black people, the red cell is made up of hemoglobin, which is the part of the red cell that brings the color red to it. And then like a water-like pool that it sits in, both of them constitute the red cell. in my previous video, I had mentioned that every cell has certain structures in them that we call organelles, as one of which is the nucleus. Mitochondrium is another one. Endoplasmic reticulum is another one, just to remind you of ones we have mentioned in the past. All those things are inside the cell, like an orange. The orange has a peel. That peel is what we call the cell wall, and inside the orange is like the cell. And then you have the orange seed and the pulp. Those constitute what is inside the cell. So the hemoglobin contains two major components, the heme and the globin. The globin is the protein component of hemoglobin, and the heme is the iron component. So when the red cell is no longer useful and is destroyed, the body will release this hemoglobin, and your liver, using some mechanisms, will break them apart. The portion that contains the heme is actually converted to something we call bilirubin, which at the end of the day is conjugated with other things to produce the bile, which we store in the gallbladder. The bile then goes from gallbladder when it's needed to your gut in order to help you break down fat when you eat. So the person who has sickle cell, because the sickle cell, if you look at the Russian flag, you will see a shape of sickle. That is what the red blood cell of somebody who has sickle cell anemia looks like. But normal red blood cell usually is like ellipsoidal, or if we may say oval in shape. And so if your body recognizes that your hemoglobin is sickled or it has abnormal shape, the spleen and other things in your body will trigger a mechanism by which that hemoglobin will be destroyed. And that's why people with sickle cell anemia always have anemia. That's why the disease is called sickle cell anemia, because they are constantly destroying their red cells. And the red cells have abnormal shape. And without diving into sickle cell as a disease itself, it just simply is a genetic illness or disease in which a certain amino acid on the hemoglobin sequence called valine replaces glutamine. When it does, that red cell is it will not have a good shape, and it's not going to be soluble. Most often than not, and then the body is going to destroy it. So destruction of red cell is another way you lose blood. And this destruction, sometimes we call it a hemolysis. You just break it up. And there are many things that can cause the hemolysis. This is just one example. And so now that we have this information as to where the red cell is made, how it's made, and the things that we need to make the red cells. So your bone marrow is what makes the red cells, and it has to be healthy. And then it needs the nutrients from the food we eat, particularly iron. And there are a lot of amino acids that constitute the nutrients you use to make the enzymes that are necessary in order to synthesize or make the red cells. Like I said, all enzymes are proteins. If you lack them, you're not going to be able to make adequate red cells. Therefore, there are certain cases where one is deficient in certain enzyme, for instance, glucose 6 dehydrogenase, glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase. If you are deficient in it, you have the tendency to break up your red cells. And some people, if you take certain medications, this glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency makes it easier for you to destroy your red cells, such as people are taking malaria medications, particularly in malaria endemic areas. And then other enzymes that the body needs, such as hexokinase, phosphofructokinase, phosphoglycerate kinase are all needed in the red blood cell production. You need the proteins to build this enzyme, which are also protein. These are going to help the bone marrow to make the red cells. You also need a functional kidney, because there is a chemical that comes from the kidneys called erythropoietin that you need to help the bone marrow to make your red cells. If your kidneys are not functioning, you are going to be anemic because you won't have enough erythropoietin for the bone marrow to use to make red cells. Therefore, you see that these are all interrelated. So you cannot know if you have low blood count without checking your blood test. Therefore, it's essential to at least see your doctors, no matter how healthy you believe you are, every 6 months or once a year. If you are under 30, to make sure that all your labs are normal. It's called annual physical or biannual physical. And if you're over 30, over 35 going up, you need to see your doctors more. This decision on frequency is going to be determined between you and your doctor. Sometimes finding that you have anemia will help you detect certain illnesses that you can correct before they get too far. For instance, when I talk about bleed, part of the ways people bleed is if you have ulcer in your stomach and you don't know that you do, you just say, I have indigestion, I have pain in my stomach all the time. It may be ulcer, and that ulcer may be bleeding little by little, going down to your large intestine and coming out with the stool. You wouldn't notice that. The best you can, if it's a large bleed, then your stool is going to become black. When you see that, then the chance is that you are bleeding from your stomach and the blood is getting digested before it gets to your large intestine and comes outside, and you see the color black, and we call it melena. If you vomit blood from the same ulcer, it's going to be red when it comes out instead of black because it's not digested. If you see red blood in your stool, and sometimes we have to use chemical, we call it guaiac test or hemoccult test, where we take the stool and we apply a little chemical to it. If it changes a certain color, we know there's blood in the stool, and that's an indication that you are bleeding from your colon. And colon cancer is very common, and this is a screening test to detect colon cancer. So once we see that, we'll send the patient to see a surgeon or a gastroenterologist for them to put a scope, which is a tube with light, through the rectum into the large intestine to look for where the blood is coming from to make sure it's not cancer. In some countries, it may be as a result of different kinds of worms, like hookworm, tapeworm, and etc. Even though you can find the eggs or these worms in the stool, you still, in persons that are at least 50 years and above, do a colonoscopy to make sure the person doesn't have cancer. Again, if you have low blood count, that may be an evidence that you have kidney disease. Because if you have kidney disease, you don't have erythropoietin enough to make red cells. So that if they can find the source of that anemia, it gives them opportunity to check your kidney numbers. And if you're able to diagnose that at that time, then you're catching the disease early enough. So there are no specific symptoms that you can find to say, oh, this person has an anemia, but they are suggestive, leading you to make a presumption that this individual may have anemia and then run the test. Some of those are when you are always tired, no matter what you do, which is called fatigue. When a child has problem focusing, when you have shortness of breath without provocation, you are short of breath at rest, or you're short of breath on exertion. Short of breath on exertion means if you exert yourself, like you're walking or you're trying to do some activities, and you find yourself becoming short of breath. It can come from the heart or from other things, but it can also come from anemia. A headache, palpitations, leg cramps, and in general, when somebody looks pale, it's suggestive that the person may have anemia. So you are forced to, as a physician, to check the person's blood count. So overall, lack of adequate blood count may signify bone marrow disease, and bone marrow by itself can be suppressed by a whole lot of things, such as infections, viral infections, bacterial infections, medications. So the chance that you are going to develop a serious problem, going to take medicine that you don't know anything about to help you with one disease, that same medicine can cause many other problems as side effects. So it's necessary for you to discuss with your physician before swallowing pills that you're not familiar with and what they can cause. Certain medications can wipe out your bone marrow, and it's called aplastic anemia. When you have anemia, it may indicate that person has leukemia. Because it's the bone marrow that makes the white cells, makes the platelets, which are parts of the blood. So if you don't have enough red cell, it may mean that you're making too much white cell, displacing the red cells in the blood, or that the bone marrow is not making enough. If the bone marrow is making too much white cells, that's leukemia. So finding the anemia may become a chance for you to know if the person has leukemia or not. So as you can see, in general, it is necessary to see your doctors frequently for checkup and make sure that all the necessary evaluations are made on your behalf to detect things when they are airways. And it's called preventive medicine. So remember the video on nutrition. Without nutrition, you're not going to have adequate red blood cell count, because everything that you need to make the red cells comes from food. And then the bone marrow itself requires erythropoietin from the kidney to help it to produce the red cell. So ultimately, all these are all interrelated. I urge very young women who don't go to doctors to please do so, particularly your gynecologist, in reference to heavy menstrual period, because severe anemia over time can cause your heart to fail, and it's called cardiomyopathy. It can cause you to have a heart attack by leading to ischemic heart disease. And the consequences of anemia, you just stand somebody in front of you and you go from head to toe. Every part of the body is affected by anemia. Because it's anemia, because it is the red blood cell. Its function is to transport oxygen to all of your tissues. Without adequate oxygen, the body is going to become ischemic. Eventually, the body is going to die. And a quick test is if you see somebody who closes the nose very tight and closes the mouth very tight for 20 minutes, he's going to die, because there isn't any oxygen going into your lungs. And it is when oxygen goes into your lung, then the blood will go to the lungs and extract the oxygen from the lung and transport it to all parts of the body for the body to do and perform different organs to perform their functions. So absence of adequate red cells means you don't have enough oxygen and nutrients transported to the rest of your body. And that leads to death from any complication. And I hope this helps.